Sherry Turkle, the author of a very interesting new book called Alone Together, Why We Expect More from Technology and Less from Each Other. Sherry, this is a book that incorporates, what, 15 years of research?
Yes. Yes.
Yes? More? Well, tell me why and how and when.
Well, I finished, in 1995, I finished a book called Life on the Screen, Identity in the Age of the Internet, which was a very positive book. That book was about really connecting with each other through the medium of the internet. And it was about the early AOL, the chat rooms, the early virtual communities, the MUDs, the MOOs. And I had a very positive view of the kind of possibilities for identity exploration through this medium. And then two things happened to me in, I don't know, Life on the Screen came out in 1995. I want to say 1995 and a half. And one was I met the robot Cog, which was an early sociable robot that Rodney Brooks was building at MIT. And this is a robot that looks you in the eye, gestures towards you, tracks your motion. And I felt myself really in the thrall of this robot, almost competitive with other people in the room for its attention. And I realized that when a robot does that to us, these new sociable robots that ask for our attention in that way, that ask us to nurture them and draw us into bonds of connection with them, that we're toast, that they push our Darwinian buttons to connect with them, that we experience them as sentient. And I decided I wanted to follow that story. It was something I hadn't anticipated really in my earlier work. And the second experience I had was I met the early cyborgs at MIT, the early computer scientists like Steve Mann, Thad Starner, who were wearing backpacks that had computers, you know, antenna, were wearing goggles that had screens on them, keyboards in their pockets, and who essentially were on the web all the time. And they were wearing big versions of what would become what we all have now with us on all the time in our smartphones, which was that they had technology that allowed them to be always on the web. And they had the early mobile technology. And I wanted to track that story of what it would be when we essentially had a technology that allowed us to always bail out and be in the virtual. Because in my optimism in Life on the Screen, I had imagined that we would do this identity exploration kind of off hours. You know, we would be in the real, and then we would, I don't know, have some couple of hours in which we would experiment with the virtual, and then we would come back and be in the real. And the experience of seeing those early experimenters of having something always on you, made me realize that I hadn't seen the future, where we would always be able to, as I put it, not just multitask, but multi-life, you know, always have this other life in the virtual. And that was really the genesis of the book. And I decided to follow it over a long period of time, really see how it unfolded, you know, not to tell sort of an early adopter's story. And this book is the result of that journey.
And you had how many hundred studies in the book, people you followed?
Well, there were many studies. There were 4 or 5 studies of robots of various kinds. I studied the Tamagotchis, I studied Furby. I mean, I studied every sociable robot, essentially, then, that hit the market. From the earliest Tamagotchis that aren't even a robot, there were a little LED creature and a little plastic egg that I counted as a sociable robot because it did the crucial thing. It asked for nurturance. And I realized that in the case of sociable robotics, nurturance is the killer app, because people nurture what we love, but we also love what we nurture. So when a digital creature asks for our nurturance, we attach to it. And so I studied every creature, every digital creature that asks for our care, and studied the attachments from Tamagotchi, studies of Tamagotchis, Furbies, Aibos, My Real Babies, Kismet, Cog, So there are hundreds of children and adults in those studies, including hundreds of studies and hundreds of people in nursing homes. And then there's a whole other branch of studies that are studies of adolescents and their families that include about 300 children, 150 adults that are studies of the connectivity culture. So there are two sections of the book that interleave together because I see a connection between these two movements, because in the first, you're alone with a robot. You are alone when you're with a robot, but you experience a new intimacy. And in connectivity culture, you're really with other people, but you can experience a new isolation. So in solitude, new intimacies, in intimacies, new solitudes. And I try to show how we're at a very particular, kind of a moment of a perfect storm in the culture where these two things are coming together.